The US government abandoned the tunnel network half a century ago, yet something inside it has never powered down. It began innocently enough, or so it seemed. A routine transfer of declassified Cold War archives, digital files migrating between servers, mostly standard, missile tests, bunker schematics, radiation safety sheets. Then, buried deep in the folder hierarchy, one blueprint stood out. Faded stamp, USACE Internal, do not replicate. The map revealed a vast subterranean nuclear tunnel network, carved beneath a remote desert testing range. Thick red ink scratched out most passages, as if someone had deliberately obscured them, leaving only one corridor untouched. A slender, narrow tunnel extending farther underground than any facility the US had ever acknowledged. Next to it, in faint, trembling handwriting, a warning. Reactor core access. Last entry, 1971. The official records contradicted it. All US underground reactor tests ended in the late 1960s. Yet this passage suggested a live core remained, hidden below. I needed answers. Half a dozen clearance requests, 2 tense interviews, and an uneasy silence later. Permission was granted. The entrance was unremarkable. A ventilation shaft buried behind rusted fencing, overlooked for decades. The elevator cage groaned as I descended, each meter down transforming the air from dry desert heat into a humid warmth, as if the ground itself exhaled life. My skin prickled, a static charge crawling over my forearms. At the bottom, darkness swallowed the floor. Not a flicker of emergency light, not a hum from ventilation. Only the faint metallic tang of old infrastructure, mixed with something faintly acrid, ozone, or something worse. I consulted the blueprint. The corridor should have been straightforward, engineered for efficiency. But reality had diverged from the plans. The walls were coated with a material unfamiliar to me. Smooth, almost polished, absorbing light like black marble. My flashlight beam barely reflected, vanishing as if swallowed by the tunnel itself. A vibration shivered through the floor. Not the ground, through the walls. Resonance. Something massive, moving unseen. I paused, calculating. If the structure housed a nuclear core still active, thermal convection or residual magnetic fields might explain the shift. But this frequency was deliberate, controlled, alive. Turning the first corner, I discovered a long metallic track embedded in the floor. Straight, flawless, vanishing into the darkness. Too narrow for any standard vehicle, too heavy for human transport. Whatever traversed it had mass, speed, and precision, all designed for something unimaginable. The temperature climbed. Sweat prickled my back, but the heat felt unnatural, localized, almost breathing. A low hum began, vibrating through my boots. Not machinery. Not yet. The rhythm suggested intent. The tunnel curved, revealing a massive circular blast door. Reinforced bolts, thicker than a wrist, lined its edges. A crack ran along its seam, leaking a faint, pulsing red glow. My mind raced. The facility was dismantled decades ago. No power should exist. Yet the glow throbbed, irregular at first, then steady, a heartbeat alive and aware. I leaned closer, ear against the cold steel. A faint metallic groan answered me. Then, slow, deliberate exhalations, breath-like vibrations transmitted through the metal. My instincts screamed to retreat. My curiosity urged forward. I decided, measure, observe, and analyze. The threshold was too dangerous to cross blindly. The red pulse intensified. Warm air, heavier than physics should allow, brushed across my neck. I could feel the pressure gradient shift. The walls themselves seemed to hum with energy, as if conducting currents beyond simple electricity. A tap, sharp, metallic. 2 knocks, deliberate. Intelligence behind the action. A warning, a test, something waiting decades for a witness. My flashlight flickered. Dust fell from the ceiling. The blueprint had named this chamber Reactor 7 Auxiliary Core. Only 6 reactors were officially recorded in the region. Reactor 7 shouldn't exist. The discovery was a paradox. I squatted, pressing a hand against the wall. Vibration surged, more than before. Not mechanical failure, a pulse, an alert, something reacting to my presence. My mind calculated. If this was a dormant experimental core, reactivation could destabilize the tunnel instantly. I was weighing my exit against the unknown hazard behind the steel. A faint click. The track beneath me shivered. Something heavy moved along it, slow, deliberate, precise. My eyes scanned the darkness. No wheels, no vehicle silhouette, only shadows moving in rhythm with the hum. The tunnel had been abandoned for 50 years. Yet every element, red light, pulsing energy, metallic track, vibrations, suggested it had never been inactive. Then from the crack in the blast door, a whisper emerged, garbled, distorted by decades of concrete and steel, yet unmistakably human in cadence. Stay. Back. A warning or a challenge. My pulse spiked. I knew this wasn't just a forgotten nuclear corridor. It was a sentinel, a trap, something waiting. And as I prepared to step forward, another sound rippled through the tunnel. Metal scraping metal. A slow, deliberate dragging along the track. The corridor that should have been empty was alive. Watching, moving, and I was in its center. I shone the flashlight down the track. 2 small red lights blinked open, perfectly aligned, and fixed directly on me. Not bright, not aggressive, just aware. Waiting. The deeper I went, the more it became clear. The tunnels weren't abandoned. They were waiting. The 2 red lights at the far end of the metallic track didn't move, but they weren't idle. They pulsed in rhythm with the faint heartbeat from behind the blast door. My mind raced. Was it a surveillance system left active for decades, or something more? Deliberate? I decided to approach cautiously, analyzing every sensation. The air pressure changed as I moved forward. My boots sank slightly into the dust-dense floor, and the walls hummed under my fingertips. Static crackled along the polished surface, dancing up my arms. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Something was generating a field, mechanical, magnetic, or perhaps nuclear in nature. I scanned the walls with my flashlight. Faint etchings appeared along the smooth surface, almost like control notations or calibration logs. Dates were scratched in alongside cryptic acronyms. 1963 IFST, likely inertial field stabilization test, part of a now classified Cold War project. Another mark read, thermal gradient checked. Acceptable. The engineers had left breadcrumbs for someone who knew how to read them, but the purpose had long been lost to public records. The pulse behind the blast door quickened. A faint warmth spread through the corridor, as if the room exhaled life. I considered retreat, but my military training overruled instinct. Every second counted, and observation was critical. I measured the temperature with my portable sensor. Heat far beyond passive decay, but perfectly stable. This wasn't residual. This was active maintenance. The core had never stopped. A subtle vibration traveled up the track. My flashlight flickered, illuminating a creeping metallic sheen along the rails. Not rust, not corrosion. A thin layer of unknown alloy, reflective, pulsating in sync with the light from the chamber. My mind calculated. If this filament was moving autonomously, it had mass, precision, and awareness. I crouched to inspect the track closer. Small electrical arcs sparked as if the surface itself conducted a latent current. My boots prickled with static. The pulse quickened, answering the arcs. Something in the chamber, and whatever these lights belonged to, was aware I was present. I debated my next move. If the machine at the end of the tunnel activated first, the corridor could become a trap. But if I triggered the chamber prematurely, the consequences were unknowable. I decided, gather data, but stay just beyond reach. Every micro-decision mattered. A distant mechanical thrum began, slow, heavy, deliberate. Not the red-eyed sentry alone. Something else moved. I could hear it behind the shadows. A dragging, grinding sound along the tracks. The two sets of energy, chamber and sentry, were converging. But which was in control? Suddenly, the chamber emitted a low-frequency hum. The red glow flared through the crack, stronger than before. The two blinking red lights along the track synchronized with the pulse. Awareness had escalated into coordination. My mind raced. This was no simple, automated system. It was adaptive. It could respond, analyze, and execute. A self-aware Cold War sentinel, engineered to last decades without human intervention. I noticed the air itself seemed denser near the blast door. Tiny particles swirled in visible currents, illuminated by my flashlight. There was heat, static, ozone, almost like the environment itself was part of the system. The hum thickened. I realized this. The chamber wasn't just a reactor. It was a nexus of energy and intelligence. A metallic click echoed beneath my feet. The filament on the track coiled slightly, then shot forward in a smooth, predatory motion. My pulse spiked. I weighed my options. Retreat risked exposure to whatever moved behind me. Advance risked triggering the chamber's full awareness. I needed an alternative. Observe, calculate, and wait. Then the machine at the tunnel's end shifted. Its massive arm extended, sensors adjusting to the pulse. For a heartbeat it froze, overwhelmed, almost hesitant. The chamber seemed to exert authority. My mind calculated the paradox. The sentry designed to guard now acted as a subordinate to something more intelligent, more dangerous. From behind the blast door, the garbled whisper returned. Do not proceed. But another sound intruded. A dragging, heavier thump, unmistakably on the track. Something was approaching. Not slow anymore. Deliberate. Alive. Or at least aware. I glanced down the corridor. The two red lights had begun moving along the track. Small but precise. Scanning. Testing. Their pattern mirrored the pulse of the chamber. They weren't independent. They were scouts. Coordinated, intelligent, and unyielding. My hand tightened around my flashlight. I calculated escape paths, sensor readings, and possible outcomes. Every instinct screamed to pull back, but observation demanded forward analysis. I took another step. The heat intensified. Static flared across the walls. The red pulse blazed brighter, almost anticipating my movement. The corridor's silence had vanished. Now there was dialogue in energy, movement, and vibrations. Everything was communicating. And I was at the center of it. Then, without warning, the filament curled toward me. Fast, smooth, precise. I had milliseconds to react. I leapt aside. The filament struck the track, sending sparks flying. The pulse from the blast door flared violently. The two red lights converged. And for the first time, I realized. The tunnels weren't just defending something. They were studying me. What was designed to guard had begun to think. And now, it wasn't sure if I was intruder or test subject. two red lights blinked in perfect sync with the pulse from the blast door chamber. I froze, analyzing every movement. Each blink, each flicker, each subtle shift in air pressure seemed to communicate something I couldn't yet decipher. My mind raced. If these were automated scouts, their behavior was adaptive. If not, something else was alive in the tunnel. The metallic thrum from the far end grew louder. The sentry machine, tall and armored, stepped forward, but not aggressively. Its limbs moved with deliberate weight distribution, balancing perfectly along the embedded track. Each step resonated through the floor, vibrating my boots in rhythm with the pulse from behind the door. My thoughts calculated. If it continued, the track would act as a single conduit, linking the sentry's power systems to the chamber. Was it a command interface or a hive mind? I crouched, studying the floor. Small arcs of static flared along the rails, dancing in synchronization with the sentry's approach. The red lights, tiny autonomous sensors, scanned forward, mapping the environment in real time. My heart raced. Every system in the tunnel, from the pulse of the chamber to the movement of the sentry, was synchronized. Somehow, decades of abandonment had been a ruse. The hum shifted pitch, low and resonant, vibrating in my chest. My portable scanner confirmed it. The energy wasn't merely electrical. Magnetic fluctuations, subtle heat gradients, localized pressure differentials, all beyond any known Cold War prototype. The chamber wasn't dormant. It was alive, or something that mimicked life. A gust of unnaturally warm air brushed my face. Tiny particles lifted from the floor, swirling in currents visible in my flashlight beam. I traced them. Each swirled toward the track, then recoiled toward the blast door, like invisible threads linking the sentry to the chamber. My calculations screamed. Whatever this system was, it was monitoring both me and itself. Suddenly, the sentry paused mid-step. Its red sensor eyes focused on the blast door, then flicked toward the filaments sliding through the crack. A realization struck me. The machine wasn't hostile. It was reacting to the chamber's signals. My pulse spiked. The blueprint had never mentioned an autonomous interface of this complexity. This wasn't simply a guard mechanism. It was a caretaker, obeying commands older than any living operator. A faint whisper traveled through the air, garbled but perceptible. Do, not touch. Not directed at me, but at the system. The chamber itself was sending instructions. My mind ran scenarios. Could the sentry override its original programming if the chamber decided it had to? And if it could, what did that mean for my presence here? The filaments twisted forward again, scanning, probing, testing the air. Sparks leapt where they contacted the track. I made a micro-decision. Remain still and analyze. Moving recklessly would trigger a response I couldn't predict. Every second was a calculation, a test of endurance and intelligence against a system far beyond my comprehension. Then something shifted, a misdirection. The sentry raised its arm, not toward me, but toward a side conduit I hadn't noticed. A panel slid open along the wall, revealing faintly glowing nodes and wires. Its head pivoted slightly, sensors aligning. My mind recalculated. The sentry wasn't targeting me. It was responding to the chamber's command hierarchy. Whatever lived, behind that blast door was the real operator. I had been mistaken, thinking it was the threat. The red pulse intensified. Heat radiated, denser than any reactor decay should allow. Air pressure changed again, subtle but distinct. A warning. I could feel the static charge in the walls prickling my fingertips. The chamber wasn't only alive, it was aware of me, and it was teaching the sentry to respond. Suddenly, the dragging sound resumed, louder, deliberate, and coming closer along the track. My calculations ran wild. If the approaching system, whatever it was, linked with the chamber, it could trap me between two intelligent forces. I had to prepare, but every microstep risked detection. I decided to move laterally, hugging the wall, keeping the flashlight low. The sentry tracked me, not threateningly, but in observation. My mind scanned all possibilities. Could I communicate? Or was it evaluating me for containment, for extraction, for termination? The filaments slipped farther through the blast door crack. Each pulse mirrored the heartbeat rhythm, synchronized perfectly with the sentry's steps. My mind connected the dots. This was a two-system hive. One part inertial, one adaptive, both powered by decades-old nuclear engineering, combined to function as a sentinel and caretaker. It wasn't guarding a reactor, it was guarding itself. Then, from behind the sentry, a faint mechanical hiss echoed. Something metallic scraped the floor, slow and methodical. I flicked my flashlight along the tunnel and froze. A faint humanoid outline appeared inside the elevator shaft, wearing partial Cold War-era equipment, helmet visor reflecting the red pulse. Not fully visible, but enough to suggest knowledge. Someone, or something, had been monitoring this entire operation. The sentry's red eyes glowed brighter, filaments recoiled, and the chamber's pulse accelerated. I realized the elevator figure wasn't arriving by accident. It was connected. Whatever emerged next would decide if I left the tunnel alive, or became part of its experiment. The tunnels were never abandoned. They had been waiting. Not for me, but for someone capable of understanding them. The red pulse from the blast door blazed violently, illuminating the track, the filaments, and the sentry machine kneeling before it. The air thrummed with energy, heat, static, and faint ozone intermingling with the metallic scent of decades-old machinery. I measured the heat with my portable sensor, far beyond any residual decay. The chamber was fully active, and it wasn't just a reactor, it was intelligent. The sentry stepped back slightly, raising one massive arm. Its red sensors aligned with the filaments, now curling outward like probing fingers. I realized with a cold certainty. The two systems weren't hostile independently. They were coordinating, adaptive, a hive of Cold War engineering that had learned to survive on its own. A subtle vibration rolled beneath my boots. I crouched, analyzing. The dragging sound along the track grew louder, deliberate, but this time it wasn't approaching randomly. It was following a precise path dictated by the chamber's pulse. My mind raced. The system could isolate, evaluate, and neutralize threats. If I moved wrong, the corridor would become a kill zone. From behind the blast door, the garbled voice returned, clearer now. Access validated. Not a warning, an acknowledgement. The chamber had recognized me. My calculations flashed through my mind. If this is a caretaker system, my presence was now registered as an operational variable. The sentry was no longer just guarding. It was integrating me into its assessment. The filaments advanced, tracing the floor toward me, glowing brighter with each pulse. I pressed against the wall, careful not to disturb any microsensors embedded in the polished surfaces. Air density shifted around the filaments. A pressure gradient formed. My mind ran possibilities. They weren't just mechanical. They were measuring, adapting, testing. The chamber wasn't powering them. It was teaching them. Then, the elevator cage creaked, descending without control. A figure emerged, partially silhouetted, visor reflecting the chamber's red glow. My pulse spiked. The figure wasn't a soldier. It was a survivor or engineer, decades removed, somehow preserved within the tunnel system. Helmet lights blinked intermittently, revealing subtle burns of luminescent red across worn fabric. A clue they had been exposed to whatever energy powered the chamber. I had one chance. Step toward the figure and risk the hive's judgment, or retreat and risk the sentry blocking my exit. My decision was tactical: observe, measure, and remain neutral. Every micro-movement counted. The sentry pivoted, aligning fully with the chamber. Its limbs flexed, glowing veins along the back, coils pulsing. It was preparing for interaction, not confrontation. The filaments reacted in kind, arching gracefully toward the blast door's crack. The pulse accelerated, rhythmic, synchronized. Then, something impossible. The chamber extended a filament upward, brushing the edge of the blast door. Sparks hissed where it contacted steel. The sentry reacted instantly, kneeling, arms raised in an adaptive gesture I had never seen in military units. Not compliance, recognition, subordination to a higher system. The elevator figure moved forward, visor scanning. A faint mechanical whisper accompanied each step, almost as if they were communicating with the chamber and sentry in real time. My calculations confirmed. This wasn't human command. It was symbiosis. The figure, sentry, and chamber were a single, integrated Cold War experiment. Long forgotten, fully alive, and evaluating me. The pulse surged, filling the corridor with vibration. I measured a thermal gradient, too stable for passive decay, too precise for any known technology. This was a self-sustaining hybrid reactor, engineered to survive and adapt. A nuclear heart, alive, intelligent, fully aware. A filament traced the edge of my boot, pulsing in sync with the chamber's heartbeat. I held perfectly still, calculating. Any sudden motion might trigger full activation. Instead, I observed, analyzing, waiting. Micro-decisions were my only shield. The chamber's voice boomed, "Observer detected, reassessment required." The sentry stiffened, red sensors bright. Filaments coiled back, pulsing. The elevator figure stopped, raising one gloved hand slightly. A neutral gesture, almost ceremonial. My mind raced. I wasn't being threatened. I was being measured. Then the blast door shifted, opening fully. Heat and light poured into the corridor. Veins of glowing filaments extended from the chamber, intertwining with the sentry's limbs. The pulse slowed slightly, synchronized. The system wasn't attacking. It was restoring itself, reactivating a decades-old protocol. I realized the truth. The chamber, the sentry, the figure. They were one living Cold War experiment. Abandoned, yes. Dangerous, yes. But not hostile unless provoked. My presence was a variable, a test of observation and restraint. The elevator figure whispered, visor reflecting the red glow. "You were never supposed to find this, but now, neither of us can leave." A warning, a statement, and a paradox. The tunnels weren't abandoned. They were awake. They were intelligent. They were alive. I had stepped into history, into a Cold War secret that had outlasted everyone who built it. The pulse of the chamber, the sentry's adaptive intelligence, the figure's enigmatic presence. They had been waiting for someone capable of understanding them. And now, the tunnels were deciding what I was.